Welcome back to another episode of Games Denominations Play. Today's topic comes from the subreddit LCMS, posted by user now deleted. The original post was deleted. There was some text underneath it that is no longer there. The title of the post shows a YouTube link. Before I get into the YouTube link, this post has, as of recording, 17 upvotes and 37 comments. I'm covering this because overall, the post and the YouTube video that is in the title here is regarding a church that chose to, and its pastor, who also chose to, step away. The pastor's name is James Whatley. Whatley. The spelling of it is Whatley. I will let you figure out the best way to pronounce it. In the YouTube video, which I went to, they pronounce his name Whatley. This is the church that James Whatley used to be a pastor at. I want you to note, I did not find any mention of them being affiliated with the LCMS denomination on here. You would think, considering that Pastor Whatley resigned and essentially left the LCMS, over issues that in the YouTube video were mentioned to be of significance to him. One of which was the emphasis on organizational unity or doctrinal unity over the emphasis on reaching out to people with the gospel. You would think that they would mention that they're affiliated with the LCMS. They do not. It is not anywhere here on the website. I also did not see any mention in any documents that they posted here on the website about Pastor James Whatley and about his leaving. For those of you who are curious, this is where Pastor Whatley preaches now, Haven Church. Both churches are located in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Haven Church is not affiliated with the LCMS, and I wouldn't expect it to be, considering Pastor Whatley left the LCMS to found this church. It looks like a normal, independent, non-denominational church. A side question that came up for me personally is, Haven Church looks absolutely normal as a non-denominational church. However, so does Peace Church. Peace Church is the LCMS church, and we'll soon get into the comments, but you would think that they would be showing video that would show their more restrictive side, especially considering the changes that I've been hearing have been taking place in the LCMS denomination. As always, all these links will be provided in the description below of this video. As for the video in question, the YouTube video about Pastor James leaving, I recommend starting in around 4 minutes 17 seconds. That will cover the majority of the important information about him, Peace Church, and now currently Haven Church. Moving back to the subreddit post, because I'm here to laugh at these guys. First off, 8 days ago, top comment here, not that it's top by necessarily upvotes or necessarily pinned, is user MN1, who writes, I can at least credit Pastor Whatley for his honesty in recognizing that he and his congregation do not belong in the LCMS. This is better than those who disagree with our doctrine and stay on in order to subvert the LCMS from the inside. Honestly, that didn't take long. When I initially saw this post, I couldn't believe how upfront it was. And yet I could at the same time, because much like the Wells, the LCMS believe that they're the only ones who are going to heaven. And you must have 100% doctrinal unity. So this sentiment does not surprise me. In order to clarify if MN1 had any more information, user STL_Jhawk replied, asking, is the issue doctrine or LCMS incorporated? User MN1 replied, saying doctrine. User STL_Jhawk replied, asking, can you be specific on what doctrine issue? User MN1 responded, saying, no, I'm just answering based on what he said, quote, on the fringe on synodical orthodoxy, end quote. He's talking about doctrine issues, not LCMS incorporated. Thing is, MN1, I watched the video as well, and there were a couple times where he mentioned synodical orthodoxy, and he also mentioned leadership. He should have been more specific, I agree, but you go around and make the bold and blanket statement that it's better that, in this case, this person who disagrees with the doctrine, that he left and that he shouldn't stay on, because if he were to stay on, it'd be subversion. More information is needed before you just blanket call people who leave that they're trying to subvert LCMS from within. Moving on to the next commenter, user Yourface posted, quoting part of the original post that is now deleted, where it says, the increasing hostility to contemporary worship. User says, contemporary worship has an increasing hostility to confessional LCMS doctrine, so the more progress we can make to be consistent synod-wide on this front, the better. The number of churches on the LCMS Church Finder who have no problem singing music from commonly heterodoxical and occasionally heretical bands like Hillsong, Bethel, and Elevation is very concerning. Parentheses. Yes, I know that being contemporary doesn't make music bad. There are a few notable outliers, usually from Tomlin or Getty. I'm conflating, quote, contemporary worship, end quote, with, quote, bad doctrine, end quote, as is common in a pejorative use of that term. Okay, user Yourface. Some examples would be appreciated. Not necessary, but would be appreciated. I want to point out again, however, that the church that Pastor Whatley resigned from, the My Peace Church, it doesn't overtly affiliate itself with the LCMS, at least not on the website. And there's a bunch of footage that they post on the website that makes them look like they're into contemporary worship. Do you think that the church then needs to rid itself, so to speak, using terminology that people like you would use, rid itself of looking like they're a contemporary worship style church? Or are you okay with them having these trappings of contemporary worship? User no_storage6015 responds to nom your face, saying, I remember when contemporary worship music was just singing scripture. Now it's mostly singing words about the experience of a Christian decision, conversion, or waiting for a miracle. Perhaps this culture was always about emotions the whole time. What is certain is that things have changed. Okay. Not necessarily saying it's good or bad, he's noting that there's differences. I could definitely understand someone taking his words to mean that contemporary worship music, especially nowadays, because it's more about the experience of a Christian decision, conversion, or waiting for a miracle, that he views it as bad. I want to note here that much like the Wells, the LCMS believes that you can't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that only Jesus Christ can accept you. You can't make a decision because you're so fallen, you're so sinful, and you're so awful that only Jesus can accept you. Moving on, user Chemnitz Fanboy comments saying, I can respect leaving instead of seeking to change. Lots of options for liberals to go to. You go do you. Allow one orthodox thing out there for those of us who want it. Again, user Chemnitz Fanboy, I watched the video, and there was a lot more that I wish the pastor would elaborate on. However, he doesn't say he's liberal. He doesn't say what political alignment he is. He just expressed that he thought that, in so many words, being part of the LCMS meant it was harder to reach out to more people. Don't assume it had anything to do with liberal things, according to your own words. Moving on to user Black Shadow 9005. That person comments, I wonder what exactly he meant by, quote, on the fringe of synodical orthodoxy, end quote. Side note, I do as well. Again, there were a lot of details that were left out of the interview, and I wish that he would have elaborated on them. OP, now deleted, replied back saying, I think he was referring to the general trend the synod is heading in. He mentioned being aware they weren't going to be able to change the institution itself and needed to be separate. I just find this interesting because it seems rare someone leaves and comes back to discuss it instead of just a hard separation. I find it hard to believe his church would be considered, quote, fringe, end quote, when places like King of Kings in Omaha exist, though. Side note, King of Kings is an LCMS church. Moving on, we have user LoveToKnit9234 who commented, why good riddance? I have been thinking a lot lately about how the early church morphed into the modern institutional structures that we have. If it serves the kingdom, great, but it seems a lot of energy gets transferred into preserving institutions rather than reaching people with the gospel. One question I did have, though, is how you would call new pastors in this situation without institutional support of seminaries, etc. Also, I love traditional liturgy and music and wonder if it is in fact a barrier to reaching the unchurched or if this is overblown. I don't want to dumb things down to the level of secular culture. User IC_Huckleberry_1641 responded, saying, my spouse is LCMS. There are 4 main reasons why I quit attending church with her. Point 1. Music always seemed to be the same 3 chords, and a ton of songs with no real meat in the sermon. More on that next. Point 2. Sermons seem to focus as much, if not more, towards being proud of being Lutheran than what Christ did for us. And I am being completely honest here. When I am at another church, we don't talk about whomever in history that said the drapes had to be white, parentheses, as a hyperbole example, end parentheses. We go to the word and see how it applies. Point 3. Participants in the church seemed to be only interested in checking off a box for the week. There was no desire for fellowship. They wanted me for the head count, not to know me and see what my testimony would be. Fourth and final point. My wife would know it's, quote, X days after Pentecost, so we will be doing this today, end quote. But she would never tip me off. Crying, laughing emoji face. Before folks say, quote, oh, you are all about works, end quote. ... No, not really. I absolutely know that God does the heavy lifting in all things. I think about what might be pleasing to God. I think it is appropriate to engage His word and learn, apply it. I have a real struggle with identity religion. That is, I do not like a church that is focused on the denomination. Folks that act like theirs is the only way concerns me. Have they questioned and reflected, or are they just joining in the crowd? I have come to realize I agree with quite a bit of LCMS stances. There's a few things that still has me searching. Parentheses. For example, I am not taking communion until I am sure of its significance and the presence. End parentheses. I lurk and occasionally comment over here to learn and to see, honestly, how many pastors are like my spouses. Side note, I think he means spouse. Overall, though, this user, I honestly understand and probably would have more in common with him than most of the people on the subreddit. He's being honest. He's not being dogmatic. He's not being judgmental of people, at least not from this post that I can see, judgmental of people who aren't in the LCMS. And he is very judgmental of people in the LCMS who pretend that they have everything figured out. It's a refreshing breath of honesty, to be honest. And because it's honest, people immediately jumped on him. User @proper2357 commented, I had the opposite experience as a convert coming from a Pentecostal background. It was so refreshing to learn of a doctrine where Jesus performs the work for us, whereas in the Pentecostal focus, the worshiper is expected to perform an emotional response, parentheses, such as raising hands, clapping, and other outwardly actions, end parentheses, regardless of whether the individual actually feels such emotions. The structured, orderly nature of the church denomination was another aspect that appealed to me. I had previously attended a Pentecostal church that was a member of the SBC. Note that SBC stands for Southern Baptist Convention. Continuing on, where for the most part, individual churches in the SBC are essentially independent. In terms of organized religion, the LCMS has a far stronger denominational identity. In retrospect, I was searching for orderly structure, and I frequently wonder if presented with the opportunity, if I would have become traditional Catholic or even Orthodox. Thirdly, I am utterly baffled as to how you would conclude that the LCMS music has no meat. The contemporary songs in the Pentecostal church were the ones that consisted of the same repetitive 3 chords and little substance in the lyrics to me. The traditional hymns and the hymnal opened my eyes to an entire dimension of worship, with songs filled with direct quotations from Scripture. Obviously, a talented organist had an influential role in this, but for example, I am a man, so I almost never cry. The first time I heard the Gloria in Excelsis in the liturgy with the choir and trumpets, I was able to visualize the angels proclaiming to the shepherds in the fields in my imagination, one of the rare instances that actually brought tears to my eyes. The liturgy blew me away, and since then I could never worship in anything other than in liturgical worship. Honestly, sounds like that user had an amazing religious experience, and nothing will take that away from him. So why is he trying to take away the other commenters' experience away from him? Speaking of, that user replied saying, quoting the original reply, thirdly, I am utterly baffled as to how you would that LCMS music has no meat. User IC_Huckleberry_1641 commented in response saying, let me rephrase. The songs had the same tones, ... Honestly, were boring to my ear. Do not take it that I want drums and a guitar. Far from it. I did show choir and a cappella when I still had hair. There would be 4 or 5 songs and then maybe a 10 to 15 minute sermon. Those sermons lacked meat. replying to original reply that says, Jesus performs the work for us, whereas in the Pentecostal focus, the worshiper is expected to perform an emotional response, parentheses, such as raising hands, clapping, and other outwardly actions, end parentheses, regardless of whether the individual actually feels such emotions. User IC_Huckleberry_Soci41 replies with, to be honest, my condolences to you for experiencing that. I visited a couple of Baptist churches that focused on feelings. It drove me nuts, especially because I worked very hard to suppress my feelings. I actually prefer the independent churches, although it does make it hard when you have to find a new church. Instead of just vetting a few details, I have to vet a lot more before I truly find my church home. I find, with a hierarchy, there is politics, and I despise politics. Very, very understandable. And I wish all the best to IC Huckleberry as he searches for his church home. User Original Dogs also joins in, saying, I'm sorry you had that experience. That church doesn't sound like it's out to build God's kingdom, but rather to be an elite club. Please know that not all LCMS churches are like this. I came from the Wells and chose my church over the local Wells church for similar reasons. So I think all synods probably have some churches that just don't, quote, get it, end quote. Honestly, User Original Dogs could have left out the last couple sentences and just kept the first two sentences. It's not on IC Huckleberry to vet every single LCMS church. If he had a bad experience at one church and he found an independent church to his liking, let him go. His soul is still in God's hands, and it's gonna be fine. He doesn't have to shop around. Also, that brings up another question and some speculation as to why some people leave. When you have churches that have affiliations within a denomination with other churches, you're going to have some churches that are more open than others. However, what does the synod do to, let's use the word educate, the churches that don't get it? Do they try to educate that church? Do they try to do some church discipline? Or do they just ignore it and hope that everything blows over and doesn't hurt their synod name? I have a feeling it is very much the latter. And I am no stranger to church politics, especially having witnessed a bunch in the Wells. Moving on from the dog pile, we get to user, now deleted, aka OP, who wrote, it's good that Pastor Whatley recognizes that his church is incompatible with the LCMS. This self-separation seems to be pretty rare. If you'd like a case study on what happens when your primary focus is keeping everyone together despite theological differences, I take a look at the PCUSA and the eventual split leading to the formation of the PCA. It typically doesn't lead to anywhere but schism. Honestly, I don't know what PCUSA is, but this is probably the actual legitimate best comment out of the bunch. It's not shaming people for not staying in the LCMS. It's not shaming people for leaving because they're all about subversion. It's just recognizing incompatibility and people breaking off to do their own thing in the name of Christ. Finally, last but certainly not least, we have user Texan Apollyon, who commented, contemporary services neglect the sacraments. I'm so glad that someone downvoted this. This is one of those comments where you're like, are they trolling? Are they not? Do they actually believe this? There's so much more to the sacraments than just contemporary music. And as far as I know, contemporary services still have the sacraments. So just because someone left because you think he was too contemporary, that does not mean that he views the sacraments as any less than you do. All in all, this episode has what you would expect hearing about a pastor leaving the LCMS. A bunch of self-righteousness, a bunch of indignation at contemporary services, and just overall mostly self-congratulating, with a couple bright lights of honesty and self-reflection sprinkled in between. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next one.